Well, well, well. Lost my bell. So, all right, good morning. And if you happen to see my bell anywhere, let me know. I have misplaced that. So, feel out of sorts this morning. Um, all right, well, good morning. Hope everybody's having a good Tuesday morning. And so, a couple of announcements before we begin. Tomorrow night, if you're interested, after supper starts at 6, about 6:30, I'm going to just give an update of some of the things that are coming before our General Conference, which for us in the Methodist Church is our chief legislative body. Obviously, the General Conference starts April the 23rd. It'll run, I think, through May 3rd or 4th. But just where most of the energy and time, I think, will take what it all involved at the General Conference. So that's at 6:30 tomorrow. And then after the General Conference, we'll give more information because then it'll be a little more concrete. But just this is what at least is going into the General Conference, but it could be, changed, amended, whatever. But if you're interested, that's tomorrow at 6:30. All right, next week, the discipline of confession, and Linda is the keeper of the keys for that. So if you would like a copy of that, I'm sure if you ask nicely, she'll be more than happy to pass. Say again? Let me get some more. Well, let me tell Kathy to print out a few more. How many people need some service for today? 1, 2, maybe 5 or 6. How about that? All right. That'll come momentarily. But next week is confession, and so we'll look at that. And then on the April the 30th, is our last meeting, and we're meeting out at Mary Lou Lampton's house. Kathy will send out the address. Someone asked about a bus. I'm happy to drive a bus, but that's like only 12 or 13 seats. So if we want to carpool, that would be good as well. So if you are interested in riding in the bus, just let Kathy know on your way out today, and we'll go ahead and work out a time to get out there. I think we normally start about 10-ish, 10:30 on that last meeting. 10:30, yeah. So we'll probably meet up here 5 till 10. How about that? That might be the best thing. Those that are riding the bus, and then others can just be there at 10:30. Do we send out a list about what people are bringing, or do we don't? All right. Yeah, everybody just brings stuff, and we'll just all eat it, which is not a problem, right? So normally food's not an issue. So so today's Tuesday. On Thursday, we have 2 memorial services that I think some of you might be interested in. One is for Scott Badcock. That's at 10 in the morning here in our sanctuary. That's Philip and Chris's brother, middle brother. He passed away maybe a little over a week ago, I think. And then Will Barnes, I think some of you have heard that. Will died suddenly on Sunday about 4 o'clock. His service will be Thursday at 3 p.m. in our sanctuary. He was 56. Yeah, so he was our architect that has helped us over the last probably 8 to 9 years. Yeah, so young person. They'll receive visitors and guests in room 235 at 1:30. So from 1:30 to 2:30. Receive guests, and then they'll move to the chapel to get ready for the service that will be at 3. So, 235. Yeah, so this is room 232. So if you come out of this room, take a left, go past the little hallway, it's your first room on the right. And the reason why we're using that room is because the youth building's occupied with the college thing, and we don't have access to the fellowship hall. So what we'll do is people will enter in through Kathy's area, because there'll be a line, I'm sure, and then kind of circle back, go through 235 to greet, and then out that there. It has its own exit door. So, all right. Status of the fellowship hall. The trusses have been ordered. They're going to be on our campus early, April the 22nd, so a little over a week. And so not this Sunday, but next Monday when you come to the church from where the old Leonard Street, the beginning of that parking lot, from the side of from the fellowship hall all the way over to the scout hut, is going to be roped off, fenced off, and it'll take the entire upper parking lot and then part of the quad. And but the trusses have to be will be delivered in a couple of different 18-wheelers, but all the trusses have to be laid out. So that's a staging area. Then we'll have a crane that's going to be on that part of the quad that's closest to the church. And we're thinking that construction will start maybe April the 30th. It'll take about a week to get everything set up. And what they'll do is they're looking to take down part of the fellowship hall in segments. So we really need good weather. And the segments will be probably 4 or 5 segments. And so they'll take a segment down, put up the new trusses, dry it out, and then roof. Take a segment down, same process all the way through. Once the roof is completely secured, then they'll start doing the work on the inside. So we're hoping that the trusses are installed, roof replaced by the middle to the end of May. And then we're hoping that the entire project is completed by the end of August, ready for us after Labor Day. So we found out all this last Thursday, and so hopefully it'll all be squared away and open back up for use at Labor Day at the latest. So because it's a struggle not having it. It's been a real lot of fun, So, so it'll be all roped off going forward. So, yeah. So I'm late. We just got that information on Thursday. I'll announce that to everybody, in Sunday and in the weeks to come. So, all right. Any other announcements? Question? Yeah, somewhere. I mean, it's yeah. So let me check on the service ones real quick. Yeah, the others are coming. So one of the things, I mean, obviously with Will's passing, he's our architect for the fellowship hall. So, I mean, that's, I'm sure, I don't know if you've ever been around Will. Will was brilliant when it comes to his his job. And so it's a loss for, I'm sure, any customers that they have, just because of what, I mean, I've always been, I've known Will for longer than I had a professional relationship with him. I was introduced to him professionally when we did the big project, and have nothing but the utmost respect for how he just went about doing his job. And so it's a loss for, not just a personal loss for us as a member of this congregation, but a professional loss that is going to be felt in a number of different places. We will, I'm sure they've got other talented folks. We just work with Will. So. Yeah, it's like 10 days ago, right? So here we are again. So, and then of course they had two boys, G and then Henry. So, yeah, they're here. They're home. They got home. What's today? Tuesday. They got home yesterday. So, all right, service, and then we'll be ready to go. Thank you, Kathy. Who needs service? All right. So, as the keeper of the keys, if you'll pass those off. So anybody that needs a service, raise your hand, and we'll be going. We'll be good. Yeah, Henry will graduate from Georgia here in 3 weeks, and G is in Chattanooga working for, I think, a kind of a subsidiary of Verizon. All right, all good? Any other announcements before we begin? All right, well, let's pray. Oh God, as we gather in your name again, what we pray for is for your guidance. We would love to say that we're able to disassociate the things that are around us from our time now, but we would be lying to think that we could. So in our time that we're here, we pray for a sense of clarity and an openness as we learn together. Not just for learning's sake, but learning that's applied to our lives, and so that our life is moved and changed and transformed, even if it is to the smallest of degree, by today. At the same time, for the bonds of friendship and community and that we have as we study together, we're grateful for this, and we want to acknowledge that this morning. And then for those that are hurting, those that are in the middle of treatments and surgeries, procedures, for those that are waiting for reports, and then obviously those that are grieving, not just for the Badcock family and the Barnes family, but everybody that's part of that orbit and part of that connection. We pray for them as we pray for us. And then ultimately for peace in the world in the areas of conflict and war. We are mindful of that, and we pray for just your intervention in ways, if it's directly or indirectly, on one level, Lord, we do not care. We just want to pray for peace. And we ask this in your name. Amen. All right, so the discipline of service. And I want to just remind everybody about these disciplines that I've chosen, and they're what I call them minor disciplines. Now, service is probably getting into a little bit of a major discipline, and minor and major is kind of like the difference between a minor prophet and a major prophet. I mean, do you know the difference between a minor and a major prophet? The length of the book. That's exactly right. Yeah, so, the minor prophets are the ones that have a few chapters. The major prophets are the ones that have, forever. You get tired of reading them. And some disciplines are similar in the sense that their practice, they might be practiced by a number of folks, but sometimes they're not, just because of the lack of awareness, or they're just not taught, preached, what have you. And so that's why I would say some are considered minor and some are considered major. But disciplines by nature are not the goal. The goal, whenever we engage with any level of discipline, the goal is what is produced, or what the yield is when we engage in that discipline with God. And so that's what we always want to remember. The goal is not to serve. The goal is not to, confess or to worship or to study or prayer. Those are part of what we do, but we do those things for a certain reason. That is what happens to us, or what as an individual, and what happens to those that are around us, the community, when we engage with those levels of discipline. So we're always after the yield. And the yield, and disciplines are a gift from God to the church. And the reason why we engage them is because we know that as we engage them, something happens inside of us, or something happens inside of the community or the people or what the group, and that something is our nature, either as an individual or as a community, a corporate body. We move more into alignment with the nature of Christ. So that's why we do disciplines. That's why we teach on them, talk about them, hopefully practice them. The disciplines that we've looked at thus far are more personal in nature. And this one is as well. And what I mean by that is, even though a group might engage in that discipline, its design is more personal in nature, where you can engage with this discipline that might involve another person or the lack thereof. But that's secondary. The primary is that this is something that you do or you participate in or with, so that something changes inside of you. So last week, what was it? Solitude? Was that it? No. Submission. Yeah, submission. And then before submission was solitude. And then before that was the level of silence and some others. All those are personal and private. It might involve the public arena, but that's not the goal. You engage in those disciplines as an individual, and it can be in a private arena or not, but it's designed more so for that, because it's what you're doing at that particular time for the benefit of that. As you do that discipline, your life changes one degree or another. So again, today is service. Now next week, when we look at confession, at least from Richard Foster, who's the author of the book that these chapters stem from, he's looking at confession from a corporate entity. But confession can be either corporate can be can be personal, or it can be public, can be individual, or it can be for a corporate arena. But today's service, and the goal of service, again, all these disciplines that we've looked at, from solitude to submission to silence, what have you, same with service. What we're really after is that yield, and the yield from service is that it creates humility. All right? So that's the goal of service, is that it'll change the heart of the person, and the majority yield from engaging in this discipline, even though it might involve another person, is that the person who is serving, they are cultivating a level of humility inside of their life. So that's where that particular discipline, you'll see the effects of it, is that hopefully the heart changes of the person who is practicing the discipline. So, I love Bernard of Clairvaux. I think Bernard was 13th century, maybe 12th or 13th century. And he wrote, he's around France, modern-day France now, but he wrote extensively about love and service, and how, what does it mean to take the commandments of Jesus, to love either your neighbor or to love one another, or the John 13 passage, this new commandment I give you. And so that's where he spent the majority of his work. And I love the quote that Foster begins the chapter with, learn the lesson that if you are to do the work of a prophet, what you need is not a scepter but a hoe, which I think is interesting. And, but so much of the practice of this particular discipline is to form and create a level of humility in the life of the person.
That reminds me of the Baptist preacher that A&E does. Used to be white gloves.
Is this today?
Yeah, but it used to be white
Yeah. So yeah, work gloves instead of white gloves, work gloves. Yeah, so that's I haven't seen that commercial, but that would be definitely in line. Um, this is something you do that will engage other people, or something externally. But the whole reason why we do it is that it will form something inside of us that will eventually boil down into levels of humility. Um, so last week we looked at submission, and the symbol for submission is the cross. I mean, obviously Jesus on the cross, a level of submission there. But if there's a symbol for this particular discipline, it's the towel. And so think the towel. And that's John 13. So I don't have John 13 up, but we can. So and this is the chapter where Jesus washed the disciples' feet. So, and we looked at this last week with the idea that, particularly in verse 3, and so look at this part right here that's highlighted. So think of it. And so last week when we talked about submission, we had this idea that Jesus was the most powerful person in the room. Not just that, the most powerful person on earth at that time. He knew about his past. He knew about his future. Came from God, returning to God. But then this is what he did beginning in verse 4. He got up from the meal, took off the outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. So that's why the towel is considered, if you want, if a symbol of service. I don't know if it was in this particular chapter or if it's something else that I read. Part of what the disciples are doing in the upper room is they're arguing about who's the greatest and then also who's the least. And so it's a pecking order for them. And the context was who would wash the feet. Because normally at a meal, what would happen is the host normally had a servant or somebody that as you came in would give you oil for your hair, and then they would wash your hands and wash your feet. But obviously that did not take place. So then it was, okay, which one of us is going to wash the feet so that we can do what just would be customary before we would eat. And so this context about who's the greatest really stems from this idea of, if I'm not the greatest, that's fine, but I definitely don't want to be the least, because if I'm the least, then I'm the one that has to wash everybody's feet. So it's interesting. But what Foster mentions in the chapter that I think is good is that, and this is where humility sort of has its way in the life of a person, is that when we serve, what we ultimately learn is that this pecking order of life, the way our world operates, we can resist that. And he did mention something in the chapter I think is good. It says that most people might come to a conclusion that they're not the greatest. And they're okay with that, all right? So, but what nobody wants to be is this, the least. And so that's where service helps us, I would argue, realize that it's not about who's the greatest or who's the least, that to some degree that's the wrong question even asked. That the real issue is how do I live, what do I do, so that what happens is that God's kingdom is benefited, and however that plays out. Now, he doesn't mention Bonhoeffer in our chapter, but Bonhoeffer wrote a lot about the Christian community and a great deal about how service affects the Christian community, and then at the same time will also affect the world around. And he said there's two things that are really, really important when it comes to indicators of whether, how we deal with the whole discipline of service, because it actually reveals what's on the inside of our hearts. And he said the first one is your tongue. How how you speak, I know this is going to be shocking, right? So, I mean, how you speak reveals really what's in your heart. All right? So, if you just want to know, just put an ear to your own words over time, and that'll tell you what's really revealed on the inside of you. And they'll tell you whether or not you're struggling with humility or not. I mean, no one wants to admit that we're not humble, right? So we take pride in our humility, right? I mean, that's, but, I mean, the tongue reveals on really where the line is for you. And about either things that we will do or will not do. So, I think Bonhoeffer is spot on that if we want to pay attention to our own lives and not so much the lives of someone else, right? So you can't form humility in the life of another person. It is impossible, all right? So don't even try. Yeah, don't even try, all right? So, but what it can do is it can reveal what's on the inside of your heart and how you see yourself. So the tongue is great with revealing you. He also said, now, the eyes are just as important as the tongue because the eyes will also tell you in reflection, so you have to be honest with yourself, about do you even see the needs that are around you? And sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. There are classic examples where we might or might not even see the needs that are around us all throughout the day. Humility will look to see the needs, and also it does affect your words, how you speak, because it doesn't live with a pecking order. All right? And or the idea of who's the greatest, who's the least, and where do I sit inside of those two bookends. So I think he's right here, and I think this is where I think the discipline of service can be very helpful. Now, one of the things that he also mentioned in the chapter that I think is important for us to understand is that Jesus, in his life and his teachings, y'all are cold, didn't abolish the discipline. All right. So some are, some aren't. So at the break, just switch sides. All right. That's all you got to do is switch sides. So this past weekend we were up in Nashville, and I'm too cheap now that Caroline has an apartment that we stay at her apartment, and but I just happened to be right under the vent. And Brooke and Caroline loved the air. And boy, let me tell you, that first night was not a good night. So I now have sympathy for those that are really cold, right? So what we don't see in the Gospels, and this is where I think people who are grinding in Acts with the gospel miss it. Jesus, he didn't abolish authority. He just redefined it. And he redefines it not on this understanding of power or control or manipulation, but more based on the function of what a person does, that is what they do, and how that affects the kingdom of God and those that are around that. And that's the difference between one of the struggles that when Jesus critiques the Pharisees and the religious leaders, and then when he also critiqued just the Roman world and how they operated in general, this is often when it comes to authority and power and things like that, this is what he's focusing on, not on this. And the passage I just showed you, the John 13, is a perfect example of this. Or even in the garden scene when Peter, one of the disciples says, "Hey, should we, let's go fight?" The other one cuts off an ear, And you see this level of how Jesus responds to all that. And I mean, I forgot which gospel it is. Maybe it's Matthew's gospel, where Jesus' response is, I could have access to 1,000 angels if I wanted them. This is not the way that we're going to do it. That's paraphrased. So you see how he handles authority, or when he's questioned even by Pilate. So go to those parts in the gospel where Jesus is questioned by Pilate, and Pilate, in this level of authority says, I can do whatever I want with you. I mean, paraphrase. And his response is, you have no authority but what's given by God. But he's not trying to one-up Pilate. He's not trying to argue who's more important, who has more authority. I mean, he's able to let that stuff roll off, for lack of better words, because how he sees even authority is different. And that's just that's foreign to how we operate. I mean, think about those that are in the spotlight, and it can be in any aspect. It could be sports, it can be even religion, it could be politics. The idea of what happens when someone is either critiqued or when someone's authority or power is questioned. I mean, is it like two snakes trying to one-up each other? Or, I mean, the one who I would argue is at peace is the one that's just kind of rolls with it and is not defined by what other people say, which is a gift. No, I think a gift in the sense of, yeah, so I think it's learned. I think obviously it takes, so if you take about temperaments or personalities, those can be gifts. But it's what Jesus is modeling, and what I'm arguing for today is that I would say this is something that is learned with the help of God, because what the person is Shane's language, they're whole. They don't need something externally to define them. They're okay with it, and they realize that their identity is tied to something else, and so they're free to choose to act and respond out of that identity, out of, say, something that is not whole, where they have to defend or they have to control. So this is where service and submission work together. So submission, inward state of being that has an outward behavior, just like service. Service wants to help form that inward state of being. And in this case, it's the state of being that has humility as one of its major characteristics, or at least of its major aspects of it. But I think it's the product of a person who continually seeks after that state of being. And it's not something that happens by chance or overnight. All right? So, I mean, I think this is a continual act. Because, I mean, like even in the disciples, you see a change in how they react, right? So this is one of the passages that are mentioned in the chapter, which is Mark chapter 10, verses 35 through 45. And this is the passage where James and John, they came to Jesus and they asked him for something specific, which is in the highlighted in yellow. Let one of us sit at your right and the other one sit at your left in glory. What is right and left? If you're sitting at the right and left of someone, what do you have? You have authority and you have power. And so right and left. So right's first dominant, left is second. And so what they're asking for is prominence, prestige, power, authority, all the things that come with that. Why? Because this is how they see it. If I'm sitting here, then the other ones are not, right? I'm not the greatest. We know that's Jesus, but I surely am not the least. And maybe I'm flying just under the radar of who's the greatest. And, of course, you get his response. One, Jesus says, I love verse 38. You really don't even know what you're asking, but I'll play along nonetheless. That's what, and then you get the real response, and that's highlighted in the pink. Notice what happened when the other 10 heard about this. They were not. Yeah, indignant, that's a nice word for the Greek translation. And, of course, Jesus uses this as a teaching moment to teach them about what real authority is, what real acts of service are about. And again, so if Bonhoeffer's correct, think about what was said. I want to be next in line. Let me be first. And then what you see. And it reveals a level that's going on inside the life of the person. Now, what's interesting is that if we were to take Mark 10 and then read throughout the rest of Acts, you'll see a difference in the disciples. All right? So, one of the great things about the New Testament, and this is where we break the Gospel of Luke into 2 volumes. The Gospel of Luke and Acts. They're really one completed work in their original form. And what's great about that, and it's the one work, is you see the coming of Christ, the work of Christ, and then Acts gives you, okay, how is that applied to the life of the person? And you see a change in the disciples. So when they are, think about the other gospel passages where they are arguing amongst themselves, they're squabbling, and a lot of times they're arguing over where do we sit on the order. And it's repetitive where Jesus has to remind them, that you're not even asking the right question. And sometimes you can see a level of exasperation on behalf of Jesus. Oh, people of little faith, little children, how many times do I have to remind you about this? And so it's over and over and over. Well, death and then resurrection, and then you meet them in Acts, and after about Acts maybe 2 or 3, boy, they're different. And so one of the things you have to ask, well, what happened? Well, the role of the Holy Spirit, right? Whose purpose is to form the nature of Christ inside the life of the person. And so that's why over time, disciplines are so helpful to us, because it's not just you and the discipline that you are engaging. It's you and God that are dancing in the discipline. That's why it creates a yield. Because one of the things that we'll talk about after the break is you can engage in the discipline of service, but if you're not engaging, hoping to create what its purpose is, that is the yield, humility, it just comes off as self-righteous service. And so again, the discipline is just the context that the person and the Holy Spirit engage in. This is the act of the engagement through whatever that discipline is. And the discipline is not the goal. It's what that engagement through that act creates in its yield. And for us, we want levels of humility. All right? So it's forming the nature of Christ inside of us when we engage in the act of service. But it's not just service by itself. It's God, us, in the act. That's what creates the yield. Which is totally, same. You can, I remember when I was about to graduate college, go to seminary, and there was a joint friend of a little group that I was in, and we were engaging in reading the Bible throughout the year, like one of those projects. And this guy read the entire Bible in 45 days. It's fantastic.
He didn't do anything else.
Probably didn't learn a thing. You see what I'm saying? So, the Bible is not magical. All right? It's not like the Bible has this, if you touch the Bible, all of a sudden your life is going to, be healed. It's what God does with the Bible that changes the person. So when you engage with the Bible in the act of study, again, the Bible is not the goal. All right? The goal is what happens when we read the Bible, because that's what creates and forms the nature of Christ with us. And there's something that God does with the Bible that he does different with another book, right? So, but again, the goal is not just the Bible. The goal is what the Bible, when you engage and read and study, it becomes like a mirror. You think you're reading about somebody else, and all of a sudden you take a breath and you go, "Whoa, wait a minute, I'm really reading about me." The names are different. It's a different geographical place, but what I'm really reading about is myself. And so then that's where you sort of, on a different plane, you are now engaging with the Bible, but it's really you and God. The Bible just happens to be the context for this dance that is going on. Does that make sense? All right, so hopefully it does. If not, Linda will, at the break, will clarify everything that I said. She's the keeper of the keys today. So, Mary Lou's not here, right? She always wants to be the all-star student. Are you watching, Mary Lou? So that's, again, disciplines they want to create a yield. They want to form a yield. Their purpose is for that yield. And the yield is that our nature and the nature of Christ become one. All right? That's the goal of what it means to walk with Christ. And disciplines are it's like you ever go to the airport and you can either walk or you can get on the little escalator and it walks for you. It's like walking on the escalator. Boy, you're like really moving fast then, right? That's what the disciplines are like. It's like you can go this pace or you can engage the discipline, and then it's like, light speed. So, all right. So let's stop for a minute, see if there's anything that's not clear or some. Oh, this is function. I'm sorry. Yeah. So let me. Yeah. So how about that? That's a little bit. How about So, based on what you do, function, how you act, more so than it is, and more so than getting your own way, because you are the person with power. All right. Power, and power can be, what's the adage? It's an aphrodisiac. You get a little bit of power and it feels real good. And, because normally power can create a temptation in the life of the person that can feed, now I say can, all right, can feed the negative side of human nature, which is I can dominate, I can control, everybody else has to change, I don't have to. And so that's where power can be very, it feels good when everybody else has to do what you say, right? So it can be that way. So, I don't think we need to beat that with, I think we understand there are plenty of examples of people who have power and they use it for their own benefit compared to those that use their power for a greater purpose. And the greater purpose is what Jesus is after here. All right? So all good? Feel pretty good with this? Any questions? All right, so I'm going to clear up some board space. So one of the things that Foster did too is at the end, like on what he does with every chapter, at the end of chapters, he gives a few opportunities of how to engage this if someone is new to the discipline of service, or if they're wanting to sort of kind of stick their toe or their foot or whatever into the pool, what that might look like and how that might be helpful. And one of the things I love about Richard Foster is there will always be in every chapter some level of teaching, it doesn't matter what discipline it is, where he starts with the idea of just start small. You don't have to eat the entire sandwich in one bite. Just start small. So look for small ways to serve. And, service involves time. It involves energy. And so find one thing. I used to have a mentor that would say that, and at first I wasn't quite sure if I believed him, but after being in ministry, I do believe. He said, you can have one study and one active service. Outside of that, it's too much. I mean, if you think about it. Just, one aspect of where you're studying, and that could be like a Bible study, whatever, and that's your principal study. And then, one way of serving, but if you're serving in 15 different organizations and, that might be okay, but most of the time to say yes to something, you have to say no to something else. And if you don't, then if it's always yes, then what happens is you're sacrificing certain things that might not need to be sacrificed, if that makes sense. And when I served a church in Macon, there was this one person that was up at the church all the time. I mean, they were like the best helper in the world. And, but to be up there all the time, they were also, could have been doing some other things that could have been helpful. And to family or whatever it may be. And so I remember having a conversation with them, and I said, you need to just go home for a while. I said, we're all good up here, I promise you. And, just take a break. The church is not going to fall apart. I appreciate the love and the care, but there are a number of things that need some love and care. Focus on them as well. So start small, whatever that might look like. And so also, if you're interested in engaging in any discipline, and since we're services today, we'll talk about service, pray for an opportunity that fits. But if it's a small thing, that can be just as important. He mentioned something else, and this will really become clear when we talk about this over here. Sometimes an act of service is allowing someone else to serve you. All right? So go back to John 13. That's the passage of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Who was the one that stood up and said, no way, no how? Peter. Yeah. No way you're going to do this to me. So if there is a struggle with allowing someone else to serve you, perhaps this is a level of pride, because if we're the one that's always doing the service, then we're also the one that's always in control. All right? So just, again, consider what the discipline of service wants to create. It wants to create a level of humility in the life of the person. And there are times, the Bible gives us examples, where some of us could say, no, you're not going to serve me. I'll be the one that serves you. I remember the first time I participated in a foot washing service. I was all right with washing somebody else's feet. What I didn't like was people washing my feet. I mean, what I felt was like I felt like I was very undone. All right? So that's what foster means when it comes to allowing someone else to serve you. And, not willing to serve and not allowing someone else to serve you stem from the same place, different sides of the coin. So if it is very, very difficult for you to be served, then that might, again, eyes and ears, right? I mean, what is that revealing about your own nature? All right? He also mentioned common courtesies. I think for us down here in the South, that's just normal. So that's where we get the wind is at our back. But that's an aspect of service. Just the idea of, I remember when I was serving a church in Vienna, there was a person that she started coming to the church, much older, probably about the age of, a little bit older than my mother at that time. And I remember someone, like there was she was welcome into the community, and there were a few folks that, they huggers, right? So everybody's huggers, and I was just sort of behind them, and there was another person that just sort of kind of like, hey, welcome, come on in, and gave her a hug, and she said, you probably don't know this, but there were days where I would have given anything for someone to give me a hug. There were days where I would have given anything for someone to give me a hug. All right, so I mean, you just don't know what a common courtesy might mean to somebody else. And again, when you serve, you're not after something in return. You just do it because you want to do it. You just want this to be your lifestyle. Hospitality. Here, what he meant by hospitality is like the opening up of home and caring and things like that. That aspect of. He also mentions listening. Now, Bonhoeffer would also. What's that? This says both ears. Yeah, so hang on a second. I'm not there yet. So listening can be an act of service. What Bonhoeffer, this is just so I wouldn't forget. What Bonhoeffer said is, can you listen with both ears and not just one? Because one ear you're listening to for what's actually, what someone is saying, but what you're really doing is forming your rebuttal or your remark or whatever it may be. And he said a gift of service could be listening with both ears. Now, you've heard me say this. It's not mine. I got it from a professor, a British professor when I was at SMU. He said, listening is so close to loving that most people can't tell the difference. So I think he's right. Foster also mentioned the bear one another's burden. That's the Galatians passage. We're going to look at that after the break. And then the last one is sharing just words of life for someone. So we're past our break time too. So if you are interested in some of this, as in ways that to serve, and maybe just some small ways to do that, the very end of the chapter is where he spends time about this. So, but the key is again, it's not just the act that we want to do, but it's what that does when we serve with the presence of God, what that creates in our life. That's what the real discipline wants to create. All right, so let's take a break for about maybe 7 minutes. We'll come back maybe. Share words of life. Yeah, share words of life. Prayer list, where are we at? All right, Mimi's has it. Righty, come on in. All righty, let's ding, ding, ding. Come on back to order. So, FYI, I mean, not that it matters, there's no one signed up for refreshments next week, which is okay. But if you feel so inclined, feel free to do that. Of course, the last meeting we all bring stuff, so good there. All righty. So let's come on back together. And what I want to do for the remaining of our time is I want to look at the difference between what Foster called true service and what he called self-righteous service. And so when we talk about this, keep in the back of your mind, the goal is humility, all right? And that it's not, again, just the discipline itself, because you can engage in a discipline or a practice or whatever it may be and sort of do it by yourself, not really with the hope of allowing the discipline's work to have its effect inside of you. So, I mean, people can serve in a host of ways and their nature never changes. Or they can serve and through the act of serving, their nature changes. So this is the difference between the two. And the key is humility. That's what we want. And so one of the things that Foster did in his chapter, he said that what he calls true service is a lifestyle. And it's not just the act itself. You might involve yourself with certain actions, but that's the small issue. The big issue is that it's a lifestyle that you're a part of, that you want to foster. And what is equally important is the benefit of the other person that is either serving you or you're serving. Okay? Compared to someone who serves and what their concern really is about a desire for their own self-promotion. I know no one does that. They seek to impress. Again, not an issue for anybody. They want recognition. I don't know if you know anybody that does that, right? That serves, and if you don't say thank you, it's like, oh my gosh, we're in a war. Or they want some level of I serve, then you serve. I mean, that type of stuff where there's this sense of back and forth type. This here, what their real goal is in the serving is themselves. They might engage in an act of service, but the only reason why they're engaging is for some level of promotion of themselves. Compared to, say, what Foster calls a true sense of service, which is where what you're really after is not so much what you, as much as what it does for someone else. All right? So, another key that I think Foster's, I think this is really brilliant on his end, is can we serve and the whole act itself remain hidden? Or does it have to be public with recognition and some level of, some level of goodie that comes with it? But can you serve just for the sake of serving, even if no one ever knows or says anything? Yeah, he does at one point because he's making a comparison with the Pharisees who do it for public promotion and for self-gain. And of course, the critique there is do it, and it's not just service, it's your prayers, everything. Do it. Whether or not it's publicly noticed is secondary. The real issue is that you want to do it because you want to do it. But there, can you do it and no one ever know? Or ever says thank you or whatever it may be? Or do you serve and it has to be public and you pick and choose who gets served? Is it the high and mighty because that's some level of promotion to you? Or if it's the lowly because you can say, well, hey, I'm the one that serves all the lowly folks. Yay, Shane. Right? True service, it doesn't matter who the person is. You want to serve because you know that's the right thing to do and because ultimately it benefits the person that is receiving. So just think about the different two. Somebody can engage in the act of service and it not have a single effect on the inside of themselves. If that's the case, they're really just going through the motions. And it's normally some level of self-promotion. True service for him is not affected by mood, emotions there. This may be so. It's a lifestyle compared to something that's temporary. It's heartfelt compared to something that you just do it and you really don't care if it helps anybody. One builds unity, the other really fractures community. If you really want to read about someone who had a life-altering experience around this whole issue of service, this like a church history person, is Brother Lawrence. All right? And I think his book is called Practicing the Presence of God. Now, it's an old book. He's like a St. Francis, contemporary, so you got to go back hundreds of years, and so it's going to read like something that was written back then. But I'll give you the Cliff Notes. So Brother Lawrence wanted desperately to be part of the monastery. And so he petitioned, and he petitioned, and he petitioned, and multiple times was denied. And so, but what was offered to him was a job to be the cook and the dishwasher. And so he took it. And the whole time it was like, in the beginning of it, it was, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm washing the pots and pans. I really want to be part of the order. I want to participate in that acts of service. I want to participate in that level of community with prayers and what have you. And so in the beginning, there was a level of resentment. And he had an experience where he was washing the pots and pans, and it was like an epiphany for him. And so this is where the discipline of service can be so helpful, because he realized that in washing the pots and pans, as low as that can be, that was just as important if the presence of God was there. So later on, he was actually offered a position, a high position, in the order, and he turned it down. And he said, I'll just remain the cook and the dishwasher. And I'm fine with that. I don't need the order for my own sense of self. But in the beginning, he did. So, it's just, again, if you want to read this, or you can just Google up, give me the rundown on Brother Lawrence in 2 pages. I mean, it's not a bad thing. But he's one of my favorite persons in church history, because as he entered or wanted to enter the monastery and the order, he saw that as something that would bring him prestige, or that would be some level would complete him, and in the denial of that, it's very difficult for him, and so he did take the job of cooking for the other monks and cleaning up after them. And it wasn't until he realized that God could be in the middle of that as much as God could be in the chanting and the praying and the copying of scriptures and all those things. And he found a sense of wholeness in scrubbing pots and pans.
I think I've read about him. He just loved doing that.
Yeah.
Being in the kitchen.
Oh, yeah. So, and I've written like bulletin fronts and devotionals about Brother Lawrence. He's one of my favorite persons. And, just because I think that for him, he realized that it didn't have to be public. It's okay to be hidden. No one has to thank me. I don't have to reciprocate or anything like that. And that this is a lifestyle that I want. And what he discovered is that in serving, there was a sense of love. And it didn't matter what if anybody said anything or, and that his act was vitally important to the working of the order. I mean, they had to eat. Someone had to do the work. And he was just as comfortable doing the work, scrubbing the pots and pans and cleaning up after all the monks, and saw that as a life of Christ. So not, so I mean, if you think about Brother Lawrence, you see this, you don't see this. But in the beginning, this is how he saw service. So I think Brother Lawrence is a fascinating person to study. And, I mean, he's not the only one, but the fact that he's associated with the same people like St. Francis and things like that, there's a level of fame that goes with that just because of the other contemporaries that he was a part of. And, but, so service, service can yield some powerful things in the life, in the heart of a person, if they'll do it with the presence of God and just accept the outcome as it is, and not try to manipulate it. Just let it unfold without trying to, any of this. Then if that's the case, then I think what happens over time is that the nature, little by little, degree by degree, moves more towards something that is in line with the nature of Christ. And so I think service can be very helpful. And, to some degree, so this was written, Celebration of Discipline, I think was written late 70s, early 80s. I think that's right. I'm not 100% sure, but I give it about a 80% accuracy. How about that? But you also have the rise of servant leadership around that same time. And so you can see, for us now in 2024, servant leadership has been adopted by, even non-Christian entities and organizations, and people acknowledge and see the goodness of it and the effects of it. But this is a little bit before even the rise of servant leadership. But you can see, what Foster is describing and why servant leadership is what it is. So for us, I mean, this is probably not as new as, say, some of the other disciplines that we've studied or looked at. So any comments or thoughts or questions around the whole aspect of service? If you want some further study, obviously the passages of Mark 10, Mark 20 is the same as Mark 10. The difference is it's not the two disciples that ask, it's their mother. So it's a little bit of a difference, but it's the same concept. Acts 1, the early church, part of what the early church had to learn is around this whole concept of order and authority. The early church thought that the culmination of God's kingdom was imminent, was going to happen right then. And so they were waiting on Christ after the resurrection to say, okay, snap your fingers and make it all right. And with that, so that gives you some insight into why the disciples asked for what they asked for. Even here, Lord, is it now the time for your kingdom to come in culmination, in the fullness of it? Because the thought was, when and if that does, we're going to be on the top. We're going to be the ones with authority. And, of course, the response is, you're not even in the right ballpark. You're asking the wrong questions. But that's just an example of how in the Gospels in the early part of the book of Acts, how they saw authority, and then if you contrast that to how they are at the end of the book of Acts, they're completely different. And then, of course, Galatians, this is a great passage. This is Paul's writing to a region, so think southern Turkey is the region of Galatia. It wasn't just a city, it's a whole region. And, you know, the care for each other's burdens, I think other versions say bear one another's burdens, and in doing so you fulfill the law of Christ. And then you have a couple of verses that give some insight into that, and how when we do engage in an act of service, it does form the nature of Christ inside of us, which then pushes us out to want to do the act itself more and more and more. It's amazing how God's Spirit kind of works that way. It affects the person, or can at least, and then it actually pushes you out in to do the action more, which then affects you even more, and then you're pushed out even more. So it's this rolling type experience with God, where disciplines, you know, can just have their way. So, this one, Galatians 6, and have we ever studied the book of Galatians in here? I can't remember. I've got every book that we've studied. I got a notebook on all of them, and but I have to go back and look. I can't remember if we've done Galatians or not.
I've got written at the bottom of the beginning of Galatians, the Declaration of Independence of the New Testament. Don't ask me where I got that from. Somebody said it and I wrote it.
So what's great about the book of Galatians is, so in Paul's ministry, we got like 5 minutes. In Paul's ministry, he would move into a city. His modus operandi is he would start in the synagogue and work there. If it didn't work, then he would go outside of the synagogue. And what happened is that there were a group of people that are just known as the Judaizers. And they would follow Paul when Paul left, and they would go into that same city just after he left and would basically say, yep, Paul's right on one thing when it comes to Christ, but there's a bunch of add-ons. You got to be circumcised. You got to do all these rules. And so the writing to Galatia is Paul's taking the Judaizers to task. And so the book of Galatians stress, and so this would be the Declaration of the New Testament, stress the idea of justification by grace through faith, and that it's not tied to works. And so on that level, the whole concept of that people are made whole through the grace of God, through Christ, then yes, that's probably where that person was. Whoever said that's probably where they're going with it. Martin Luther loved the book of Romans, and he loved the book of Galatians. He hated the book of James. So your homework is to go home and read the book of James, because it is not about the grace of God. So it's the other side of the same coin. What happens after someone has received the grace of God? What do? And James writes to a Christian community that has already received the grace of God and says, you can't just sit on your backside and not be active in God's kingdom. And so it's a handful of chapters where he's calling the community, this would be the Hebrew Jerusalem Christian community, to task that says, the role of the Christian is not just to receive the grace, put it in your pocket, go sit in your room and just wait. You got to get out and do some stuff, so, and to say that you have faith, but you're not doing anything with it, then the outsider's not even going to know you have faith in the first place. So that's chapter 2. And Luther hated the book of James. And so he actually would tell his students I'm dead serious, rip it out. Oh yeah. He said, first day of class, rip out the book of James. Now, keep in mind, so he's in the 1500s, and he's the product of the Reformation. And the Reformation, what they're reforming is that salvation is mostly through certain works, sacraments. And if you do the sacraments, then you receive salvation, even if you're not even active in the sacrament at all, other than you were just there. Right? So the reformers are reforming the church because they have developed a practice that said, we're now the determining factor for salvation, and you have to do it this way. And so Luther said, no, what's above that is Christ. And so and Christ is the one that gives salvation. So it's not that Martin Luther, it's not that he, would hate and disrespectful to the New Testament. That's not it. He's a product of overemphasizing the grace of God because he's reforming the church. So reform movements in the church, they follow the same pattern. So whatever the status quo is, you move way out over here, normally to a fault, right? And then you spend there for a period of time, and then you realize that, wait a minute, we might have gone too far. So then you move back towards something that's like the center between the two, and that's really where it should be. All right? But every Reformed movement follows the same pattern. There's thesis, antithesis, synthesis is what they call it. And the Reformation, you really don't see the full effects of the Reformation until the second or third generation start to come into be. So you're like 1650, somewhere in that neighborhood, to where what you see is they way over here, and then they kind of come back to the center. There's your church history. So, all right, all good? All right, go in peace. So next week here, discipline of confession. Week after, Mary Lou's house. Mary Lou Lampton. That's exactly right. Well, she volunteered last week. We're not letting her off the hook. So, yep, we'll see you guys.